here. Good evening to you. On behalf of the Calgary Climate Hub, I welcome you to A Climate of Change, our weekly live cast exploring with thought leaders from across Canada what this wildly unprecedented moment in history means for our province, this country, the economic system, and specifically the climate crisis. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Yaqsi Nakota Nations, the Métis Nations of Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. I'd also like to make a second land acknowledgement on behalf of another group of folks that have a stake in this land that we stand on today, and that is our children, our nieces and nephews and grandchildren, and all future generations. I urge you to keep them in mind during this time as we face unprecedented change and start making decisions about what comes next. For those of you watching tonight via Facebook Live or on the Zoomcast, please feel free to post some questions for our guest. We'll get to as many of them as we can. Should you wish me not to say your name, please type the word anonymous before your question, as this show will be shared to our social networks. Otherwise, we'll assume your consent in the use of your name in the broadcast. Tonight's guest is Brandy Burdeniuk of Green Business Certification Incorporated, who has extensive experience working on green buildings, sustainability, and climate in this province. And though she currently resides in Toronto, which we won't hold against her, I feel in time the West will woo her back. Brandy Burdeniuk, welcome to A Climate of Change.
Thank you for the kind introduction. I'm happy to be here.
You betcha. To begin with, Brandy, I think we're just going to hand the stage over to you and let you say a few words, and we'll meet you on the other side. I think you can just share your screen if you have a presentation there.
Perfect. It currently says it hosts disabled participant screen sharing, so.
Oh, okay. Well, we do have a producer.
You'll have to give me the power.
Right. Well, we do have a producer there who's working hard right now, and I know that I should mention that we have had some wireless internet technical difficulties, but I think we've got them under control now. And take it away, Brandy.
Excellent. Thanks so much. So just to confirm, you can see the presentation now? Yeah?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So thank you, everyone. Don't hold it against me on two accords. I currently reside in Toronto, and I grew up in Edmonton, but we'll get there. What I'm going to talk about today is around how I stay positive and how I sort of grew up through climate advocacy in the Alberta context, which sounds like a bit of an oxymoron, but is a fantastic place to grow. So just to state my biases, I don't want to save the world to sit in the dark by myself. One of the things that I definitely sort of was driven within the entirety of my career is to make sure that we thrive and we get to celebrate and we get to build really strong community around climate change and justice. And so I come from a long line of conservators. This is my grandfather and two of his 14 children that grew up on the northern peninsula of Newfoundland. And they literally are far more sustainable than we might ever hope to be. They literally grew all their own food, caught from the ocean, and I learned a lot from them. So having come from this background in conservators, I also have two parents that are historic troublemakers. This is them on their wedding day, and they taught me to talk about really complex topics that people were not comfortable talking about. So they taught me to be myself, bold and tenacious, but also really inquisitive and to ask a lot of questions and to learn as much as possible to have a deep understanding. And so within the complexities of climate change and the conversations that are happening right now, I'm very thankful for this background. So I grew up just outside of Edmonton, Alberta, in our industrial heartland. I know it very well. I grew up in this little tiny plot of land where I was pretty much a free-range child up until about 5 years old. When the forest was full and lush in the summer, I was able to sort of go to the edges and explore and poke things with sticks. But I didn't know how close I was to the industrialization that was happening in our province in the early 80s. And so literally across the highway from where I grew up was some of the most established industrial petroleum and refineries that were happening and growing. And you can see here just Shell Scotford up in the top. We have Dow Chemical down here, and the North Saskatchewan River was actually something I was taught to kind of fear in Alberta because of just the toxicity. I went on to go to university at the University of Alberta, and focused on sustainability within design. I had a very hands-on education around furniture, and I thought I'd become an architect, which I would have become a very mediocre architect, I think, because maybe I don't have the, prowess to take as much abuse as we see a lot of architects take, but it definitely taught me to leverage how inquisitive I can be for this sort of conversation around sustainability, health, and climate. And so when I was in school, there were all these little Post-it notes that somebody made and hid all over campus. And so one of the things that I took away from this is don't be apathetic. Don't think you'll figure it out later. Make lots of mistakes. Talk to your professors. Be sure that you find what makes you tick and what makes you want to get up early and stay up late. And find what makes you happy and pursue it with all the determination in the world. And so I just happened to be at the University of Alberta when there were some really great progressive things that were happening. Naomi Klein came to the University of Alberta. She presented about No Logo. I got the chance to meet and spend time with Percy Schmeiser, who's a Canadian farmer who was going right up against Monsanto at the time around genetically modified organisms. And then I had the absolute pleasure of getting to see Ralph Nader present on campus. He's the reason we have seatbelts, but he also reminded everybody that one of the most important roles as we grow up through our country is to be active citizens. And so these sort of pieces also landed with me when Edward Bratinsky started doing all sorts of really powerful imagery around where things go. So what you're seeing in this large photo is actually a coffee maker plant in China. That is so large that you can't even see the perspective line. And so as somebody who's training to be an industrial designer, this was really powerful for me because I was the person that was designing potentially the things that would be made in a place that may harm people and their health, but also harm the environment. And so I have some props throughout today. I also read this book, Cradle to Cradle, and learned about a concept of waste equals food. And I got the opportunity to sort of start learning about products and materials and how you could support and have people thrive and be healthy while also creating these sustainable buildings that were high performance. And so some of you might know Simon Knight. He's pretty iconic in our province, and I'm thankful to have spent some time with him. So this is one of very few graphs in this presentation, I promise. But even pre-COVID, as Canadians, we spend 86% of our time indoors, about 5.5% of our lives in our car, and only 7.6% of our time outside. Now, you might be thinking pre-COVID that you spent way more time outside, but when you start thinking about how much time you're sleeping, how much time you're in your home or at work or at school, it adds up quite quickly, especially in cold climate. And so go outside, fall in love, be reminded why we do what we do, because good news is rare and you're gonna need a happy place. And around staying positive, I'm a bit of a serial optimist, and so maybe I'm that person that just finds a silver lining everywhere. But when I participated in the climate marches here in Toronto, and this is one of my own photos, it was powerful for me. I went there not ready for the emotional roller coaster I felt. I have been somebody who has participated in civil disobedience for a very long time. But I struggled with the climate marches because I just wanted to have like something a little bit more as a tangible outcome. So I was like, everybody, like, engage with your elected officials, write letters, do all these things, understand the issues as much as you can. But what I found was just the power of young people was incredible. And those voices I hope to hear and see come through our industry. We also have the Black Lives Matter, really sort of creating a conversation throughout not just the United States, but here in Canada, for us to really know our context within the history of racialized groups in our country. We also are managing this whole thing called COVID right now. So I am here in Toronto. We're pretty much just opening up now. You in Calgary are a little bit ahead of us. So this is like one of the first days I've walked outside without a mask on. So it's interesting here how different it is. But the reason I point it out is because infection control has shaped our cities in the past. many people don't know that the reason that Paris is built the way that it is because it was torn apart to create the infrastructure for waste conveyance, so that cholera wasn't this consistent issue that they constantly had to try and manage. And a lot of our civic buildings actually have brass doorknobs on them because it was actually a high touch surface, and brass actually, and copper, was believed to be not a great surface for things to live on in between people's interaction with them. And so we're starting to see this sort of design change, the same as we did when people first started talking about climate change within the building industry. And so we're seeing people redesign office spaces to account for what's happening with COVID. We're also seeing all this smart tech come into play, which the deployment of smart buildings and technology is right in lockstep with what we can do with that data to make sure that these buildings are high performance buildings, and make sure from a climate change perspective that we can get their carbon emissions down. And so lots of conversations here in Canada are happening around the cost of this pandemic. I'm sorry to tell you, this is kind of just training grounds for what we're going to be seeing with climate change globally. And so this is from a fantastic study called The Inclusive Cost of Pandemic Influenza Risk, and they make this comparison between pandemics and climate change cost. And so the impact of buildings is what I ended up focusing on around sustainability. What motivates you for climate change might be drastically different than me, but I'm just going to share with you a bit of my lived experience within why I chose to focus on this, because the impact of buildings globally is what motivates me every single day. So if you are not familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, this is a great chart from the World Green Building Council that just sort of shows all these highlights of where buildings fall into play and where they play a role, not only with health and well-being, which is top of mind right now as we move through COVID, but also around affordability and decent work for people. There's a whole bunch of training that we need for trades to actually know how to make high performance buildings so that we can make sure that we're building buildings that are not going to be liabilities for climate in the future. There's also just so much innovation in this space, and even we're seeing citywide sustainability commitments, which is quite encouraging. And so we can sort of talk at length around the climate action piece, but I want to sort of bring it a little bit more home for you. So if you don't know, the City of Calgary actually has this great resource on their page that does this breakdown for community-wide GHG inventory. Again, one of the few graphs that I have in this presentation, but it's really interactive. And what you need to know is that this blue bar is electricity. That's the emissions from electricity. And so if you're going to focus your efforts somewhere, this is a good place to target, just from a building perspective. And so I've kept the link in here, so anybody check it out. Having access to some of the open data that's available through the City of Calgary website is fantastic, but worth just taking a look at how different sectors impact different carbon profiles. And so I'm going to sort of state my bias again. So local governance to me is powerful. I think that there's a lot more that we can do as active citizens to engage and keep our elected officials accountable. So the art of governance locally motivated me as well. And so these are just a few. I run up against sort of consistently people sort of perceiving that they, as one person, can't make an impact. And I just want to tell you, when things open up, it's actually really easy to go to City Hall and support things that are on the agenda that might be in alignment with your values. So please just pay attention. These are just some small things. When the NDP were the leadership in Alberta, I proudly was a part of a bill that was passed to allow for PACE enabling legislation in Alberta. So that's Bill 10. That was supported by Minister Shay Anderson, who at the time was the Minister of Municipal Affairs. I also was a part of drafting and supporting the sustainable building policy for the City of Edmonton, and as well as just randomly urban hens and bees in the City of Edmonton as well. So just if you're passionate about something, let your elected officials know. It's important to march, but it's also really important to write an email or two every once in a while. There's also some beautiful art to being in a small city. So I know that I'm here in Toronto right now, but I had so much growth and access and mentorship that was really powerful for me because I lived in what would be considered globally a pretty small city in Edmonton. And so I got to meet David Suzuki. What? I got told so many times to take my environmental aspirations and business to Vancouver because what are you doing in Alberta as somebody that cares about the environment? But I got to tell you, being in Alberta, there is a lifetime worth of work to do in this space. And you get to meet folks that really, really like deep in my heart inspired me. So like check off that bucket list. And then I got to crush beers with him, like bucket list item I didn't even know I had. So just these beautiful, kind moments when you have the opportunity as somebody from a small town, I call it the small town advantage, but you get the ability to sort of be playful and celebrate with people that oftentimes you wouldn't get a chance to if I would have moved to Vancouver, for example. But I'm gonna say, maybe we've done ourselves a disservice by making climate change too abstract and really complex. There's a lot of really technical language in it. We sort of created our own vernacular and then we wonder why people are so confused. So this is a great chart from Blair Feltmate at the Intact Center. And if you don't know about the work that Blair's doing, please do check him out. He's got some great stuff. This is the cost of extreme weather for insurable losses since I was born. So there's just a bit of a trend there. It goes up. You can see the Alberta and Toronto floods there and the Fort McMurray fire. You know that climate change is important when insurance companies start to take it seriously. And so this is really, really important for us to consider within the context of this is just building financial literacy within our language when we make the case for why climate change is important. But again, this is really abstract. So is this. So this is the electricity grid carbon intensity forecast. So you can see sort of 2005 to 2030, the sort of intensity of emissions. So this right here, this shave off here, is as we shut down our coal-fired power plants. And you can see just sort of these emissions profiles being so different than what we have in Alberta. And this is really hard, right? Like it's gonna be really hard for us to get even lower than this once those coal-fired power plants. So being able to target within the province of Alberta is key for us as a country to be able to meet the commitments that we've made. I don't know where everybody's located that's on this call, but again, I think we've made climate change too abstract, and it's things like this, and I don't know if audio is going to work, but it's okay if it doesn't. But, and I'm going to apologize for my friends and folks that are in Calgary if this is not great for you to watch, because it's very top of mind still for a lot of folks. But this sort of intensity of flooding in Calgary is not something that will be a thing of the past. The challenge is that with climate change, as the air warms, it holds more water. And so this flooding isn't something that'll just be one thing, right? This is what climate change looks like. And this is what we sort of need to get away from the abstract sort of charts and graphs of climate change. And really, unfortunately, we're funny as humans. Once we go through something like this, it's very impactful, but sometimes we don't connect the dots between this and climate change. This is Fort McMurray. Coming from Newfoundland myself, you can see the painting behind me. I had a lot of family that were impacted by the fires in Fort McMurray, and few of them were ready for it. And this was intense, like something that folks in Fort McMurray should not have had to sort of deal with the international pressure that came with it. There was a lot of sort of finger pointing that happened at the time, if you guys recall, where it was like, well, you know, they get what they deserve working in oil and gas, which is not a good message. You don't want to kick people while they're down. We had an opportunity to bring a whole bunch of people on side, and we may have lost that opportunity. And so there's a great study of men and women that were affected by those 2013 Alberta floods. And I just want to touch on the mental health aspect, because it's not just these incidences and these shocks that impact people, it's the long-term effects. And so even 3 years after living through a flood, nearly 50% of households are significantly worried about flooding every time it rains. And so this is where that sort of tangibility of climate change might be possible within our storytelling. And I just want to invite all of you to maybe pull some of the charts and graphs out of your presentations and add in more of your personal storytelling to allow for people to find their place in this conversation and take action. And so within those fires in Fort McMurray, I saw some climate leadership that I'd never seen in our province before, both at a local government, municipal level, and also at a provincial at the time. And so I decided to run for council in Ward 11, and I truly based my entire campaign on the Sustainable Development Goals, but I also truly believe that we need leadership that understands the abstract realities of climate change and how they impact our communities. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of communities across the country that have leadership like that. In 2006, I started a green building consulting firm called EcoAmmo. If you're ever in Edmonton, go check out the Pri-Med Mosaic Center. It has a great restaurant in it called the Workshop Eatery. They don't pay me to tell you that, but it's a great place. They're doing great work around green building certification. I'm really thankful to have been a part of their team. I had the opportunity to work for a really cool company called View Dynamic Glass out of Silicon Valley. Highly recommend you take that stuff. Go take a look at that. But it's one of those things around like climate change sometimes is not super linear in the way that people address it or talk about it, but there's so much exciting innovation that's taking place right now. So when you're bogged down in those pieces where it just feels overwhelming, know that there's good stuff happening, and sometimes you just need to look for it. Or just like email me and I'll give you like a good little news nugget. So I joined the Green Business Certification Incorporated here in Canada at the end of 2018. It's part of the Canada Green Building Council. It's a sister organization. And I get to work with people that are doing high performance, zero carbon green buildings every single day. Like, what a reason to get up in the morning. So I've been in the space for nearly 20 years, and I have ups and downs just like anyone else. But there's so much good work happening. And so from being a positive person myself, I just kind of want to like sprinkle that kindness and remind you guys that there's like really good stuff happening all the time. We have a rich history to build from of innovation and entrepreneurialism. And just because we're an oil and gas province doesn't mean that the energy always has to come from squished dinosaurs, right? It doesn't need to come from oil. We can be energy leaders as a province. I truly believe that that's our next future. And so thank you so much. I think I stuck pretty good to time there. But if anybody needs my contact information, there it is.
Yeah, and we'll thank you for that, Brandy. And we've also put a video up in the chat that that has some of these ideas from your last time you gave that speech. Okay, so yeah, that's a good base for some of the things that I want to ask you about. The first question that I'd like to ask my guests is just, you know, we experienced something unprecedented, a global unprecedented event where all of us, the whole world, every country found ourselves in some form of lockdown, and civilization itself seemed to just creak to a halt for a little bit. And I think a lot of people, you know, there was a few days you look out the window and there's silence in the downtown and around you. And for me, there was a few thoughts that came to my mind, like, well, surely the world will now learn this, or the world will learn that. And so one of the key one that I like to mention is just that, you know, as a climate advocate, if you're going to try to tell me that we can't afford this or we can't afford that or we can't do big things, that's useless as an argument for me anymore. But what teachable moments have jumped out at you, Brandy?
Specifically around COVID, there definitely has been a larger conversation just around how quickly we can change our behavior. And I think that that's a really important part of this conversation that we shouldn't forget. There's real complexity to what we've seen in the last few months, and the deployment and the activity and the engagement has been breathtaking, not just at a local level, but at a global scale. And so this is training grounds, as far as I'm concerned. We're going to need similar mobilization and similar commitment to be able to tackle climate change. We're watching right now Miami doing sort of as much as they can do, but they sort of have a deployed strategy to sort of recede on some properties because they weren't trying to look at resilience and commit to sort of shoreline resilience, as they now have daytime flooding all the time. And so these types of challenges are not simple. If they were simple, we would have been able to do them already. And so I think COVID has really taught us that this is possible. It is possible for us to like en masse come together and create global change. And we've seen it even with COVID with the slowdown. Like we've seen emissions across the world go down. And it's odd now when you see a plane in the sky.
Right. Yeah. And, you know, there seems to be a thrust right now, again, all over the place to just revert back to normal, business as usual, go. But we're currently seeing in America that, you know, there's some really bad numbers coming specifically out of the South. And so I wonder, when all is said and done, do you think that this might be the thing that spurs the transition that we need? You know, like maybe 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we're looking back and we'll say, well, this happened and this happened, but then, you know, that coronavirus was an eye-opener for everybody. Is that something that might be possible?
Yeah, I think so. But I think as humans, we're quick to forget stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I know that a lot of people are like, I want to get back to normal. And I'm like, I don't. Normal didn't work for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And not just around climate change, but just around, like, I think that this is the first time in history we've given people the permission to slow down.
Yeah.
And I think that that's okay. Like, if that can be the biggest lesson learned, as somebody that's a high achiever, that's a silly thing for me to say, but it's true. Mm-hmm. The ability to slow down a little bit and really be able to check in and see what your values are and what you can live with and live without. Like, how many people have really missed their Starbucks coffees? Like, probably, like, people have now figured out how to make coffee at home. And I'm not tackling just Starbucks. I just mean, like, there's serious waste streams that come out of the behavior that we had pre-COVID. We're going to have different waste streams now, just with all the PPE that's being used. But I don't want to go back to normal. We have a lot of things that need to change that we can sort of use COVID as a good step. One of the things to note, actually, is that a lot of professionals that were sort of like VPs of sustainability within large ownership groups for buildings, for example, they have sort of all been redeployed to allow to build processes in place for COVID around health and wellness, because that's sort of one of those strategies. Is sustainability is not just energy efficiency, it's also around health and wellness. And so being able to sort of have these team members sort of have their scope and purview tied to climate change and also to COVID is a really nice complementary role that we're seeing across Canada.
Do you, so what, it seemed like for a little while, people really wanted to just try to find a way to blame China and blame specifically the wet markets in Wuhan. You'd heard about all that. And my response quite often would be, there's a whole lot about what we do that is wet market like. You know, the oceans are in catastrophe, climate is the whole thing, and then something like racism bubbles up. And so it seems like there's just a number of things that are all sort of have been swept under the carpet for a long time. Mm-hmm. And now it's like they're coming out, and they don't just come out one at a time. So to begin with, do you feel like, does capitalism need something of a renovation here? Because as it stood, wet markets are part of the plan. If the first thing is to make profit, and a distant, not even second or third, is whether it's healthy or not. The pandemic was predictable. There's not an epidemiologist on the planet who wasn't saying something like this was coming. Is capitalism the culprit here? And, you know, how do we fix that?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to speculate, and I'm not going to say that I have all the answers. I definitely, where we stand right now, date and time-wise, we have a lot to learn from everyone. Everybody should look at maybe where their supply chain for food is, because we in Canada, unless you're sort of part of a community-supported agriculture program or getting locally grass-fed beef or something like that, we have better regulations than the US when it comes to food, but and the supply chain there, but we have a lot of agricultural issues here in North America that like are pretty atrocious too. And so I know it's easy for people to sort of point to another country and another sort of culture and another way of eating and saying that's the problem. If we got rid of that, it would solve everything. And I don't think it would. We saw the wet market shut down when SARS happened and they opened right back up.
Right.
So if we can look sort of broader and more long-term, it's how do we create a resilient and anti-fragile, let's say, economy? Right. Because right now it is we've seen in the last few months just how fragile what we believe to be capitalism is globally, not just in Canada, not just in the US, but globally. And so I think it's really interesting to see these conversations around, you and I were talking about just basic income. My dad grew up in Dauphin, Manitoba, and that was one of the first places that they sort of played around with that idea. And to see people sort of en masse talking about what the future of education looks like, what the future of jobs and training looks like is really important. Because right now, kids that are going into elementary school, we don't know what the economy is going to look like and what jobs we need to train them for.
Yeah.
You'd be speculating just around. So I think that this is a really good opportunity for us to look at what the country we want needs.
Yeah.
And what that looks like to allow for people, not just rich people, to build sustainable, resilient communities, but for it to be something that is rooted in social justice, something that's rooted in like access, that allows for us to sort of like maybe build off of what Tommy Douglas built around us having this legacy of healthcare in Canada, for us to all thrive in the places that we live and work.
So another thing that we saw that we had never seen before was negative oil. Who even knew that was possible? Who even knew that was a thing? I don't know whether, okay, fair enough. But prior to that, the Alberta as a something that sees itself as being strictly oil and gas, we've been hit with a number of different things at the global level, from global investors not being interested. The tech thing didn't happen here, and it just there was just a bunch of, and then of course 2015, 2014 is the American shale revolution, and so all these global forces that are hammering down on a province that's going to just try to depend on strictly oil and gas. What do you feel like that might spur this province to start taking the right steps?
I hope so. I'm really hopeful. You guys are my home. I want to come back sometime. Yeah, like right now, I've never been afraid to fly. Right now, I'm like, I'd like to come see my family, but it's a 35-hour drive away.
Right.
And I'd have to get in an aircraft if I wanted to, So it's also this like balance between like, what do you expect out of your home, right? I expect better from governance across the board. Even if who's in power is who you voted for, you should be keeping them accountable to what they promised. You should be keeping them accountable to represent you. Because some of the things that need to change in Alberta are not things that are one person doing one thing. It's all of us collectively reinventing what the province looks like. But I like to remind people that we have only been an oil and gas province for coming up on 100 years.
Right.
They told us we couldn't get the oil out of the sand, and we figured it out. And so the opportunity that I see, and you said tech didn't really happen, but it's still possible. One of the challenges is that everybody right now, from a corporate perspective, are looking at their emissions company-wide. And Alberta, with that emissions factor that I showed you, if you build a building, exactly the same building in Calgary, because of the way that the electricity is produced from natural gas and coal, it's going to have higher emissions than building it in BC or Ontario or Quebec. And so right now, I'm watching people sell off their assets in Alberta because it helps them lower their emissions in their investments. That's not what we want to see. We don't want people to look at their emissions and go, you know what, the easiest way for me to do is to completely divest of the province. And these are not mom and pop investors. These are large pension funds. These are large international investment groups that are looking at Alberta going, I don't know if it's worth it. And so we really need to take that seriously as we start to look at all of the different things that people look at before they decide even to open a business in Alberta. But the thing that really motivates me and makes me hopeful about the future in Alberta is that the conversations like this that we're having right now are still happening in the province.
Mm-hmm.
And that we have a lot of people that have this sort of root in innovation, in being strong entrepreneurs, like successful and strong and resilient people live in Alberta. We'll figure it out. We just need to have the commitment of everybody in the province to hold our elected officials accountable for making sure that policy is put in place to make sure that we can build this province a little bit differently.
Absolutely. So, if there's going to be a recovery and things like stimulus and stuff like that, and so it's worthwhile thinking about, what sorts of, with your experience in this province, what are some of the things that if Alberta was going to look at an Alberta New Deal or a Green New Deal, what's some of the low-hanging fruit that you just say that, okay, if you're going to try to do that, this is what you guys do. You have this already, etc.
Mm-hmm.
What jumps out at you?
So the first thing, so I just want to show you a couple.
Oh, you brought stuff
that I dug out of the archives for you guys. So
cool.
Sustainability is not something that is only like a leftist idea or something that like falls squarely within like liberal.
It should be conservative. It should
be. Exactly. Put the conserve back in conservative is what I like to say.
Yeah.
So I'm going to share with you two books that are about the same age as me that were given to me by my dear friend, Stephanie Carter. So this is
24-year-old books. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. No, that's bad math. So this is from 1983, I think. Yep. At the time, conservative government and power. This is a passive solar, how to save energy book that, the sun hasn't really changed all that much. There are principles in this book that people that are doing passive house certification still follow. Mm-hmm. From one of the things that we can do is remind the conservative government that they used to do this, right? This is not some tree huggers coming out of nowhere telling you to spend more money as like a virtue tax to have high performance buildings. This is something they were teaching us a long time ago. And I don't have just one example, I have two. Yeah. And so this one too is like, look at where it comes from.
Right.
Department of Agriculture? What? So like we have these beautiful legacies in Alberta that we have forgotten about, and we have so much turnover in our governance sometimes that we think that these need to be new ideas. They're not new.
Right.
And so I hope that I'm not going to be one of those people that's like, I can't believe I still have to talk about these things. But I know that there's probably people on this call right now that have been doing this hard work for the last 30 years, and they're still like, I can't believe we still have to do this.
Yeah.
And so part of it is like being kind to yourself and the work that you've done and stay committed to keep doing that work and building a group of people around you that allow for you to see progress and see the good news when it comes up.
Right. Okay, so we're about to go to our panelists, but before we do, I have to say a few words about the folks that keep the lights on around these parts. Skyfire Energy has been designing and installing solar PV systems for homeowners, business owners, utilities, municipalities, and First Nations since 2001. They're an employee-owned, certified B Corporation with offices in Calgary, Edmonton, Penticton, and Regina. Their staff is one of the most experienced and qualified teams in the industry, having completed many of the largest and most complex solar projects in Western Canada. Their vision is nothing less than to bring the magic of solar power to the world for a stronger, healthier, and more sustainable global community. I'll also take this moment to tell our viewers about the Basic Income Initiative put forward by the Calgary Alliance for the Common Good. an alliance to which the Calgary Climate Hub proudly belongs and works alongside to make positive change in this city. A guaranteed basic income overcomes deficiencies in our social safety net and is a mechanism that lifts people out of poverty and puts money into the marketplace. It has been shown to reduce healthcare, criminal justice costs, and increase rates of school completion. No Canadian should have to live in poverty or be thrust into poverty by a public health crisis or economic emergency. It's a part of the just transition or just recovery solution set, and it's my personal perspective that a basic income alongside what's called a Housing First initiative single-handedly eliminates poverty and homelessness, and with jobs and careers increasingly disappearing in the face of robotization and automation, a universal basic income is an inevitability. And like most things I've found when it comes to sustainability, it's cheaper than how we're doing things now. As of April 21st of this year, no less than 50 Canadian senators have expressed support of a basic income to Prime Minister Trudeau, and the Alliance and myself would like you to consider adding your name to the effort. You can access our petition and get more information on this increasingly viable civilizational upgrade at calgarycommongood.org/basic_income. There's a link there in the chat. Okay, so this is our Q&A session. We allow our questioners both a question and a follow-up. We'll also continue to take your questions via the Zoom chat and from our Facebook Live feed. So post those up and we'll get to as many of them as we can. Our first up is going to be Maggie Hanna. She is a fellow at the Energy Futures Lab, which is an Alberta-based organization critical to Alberta's transition to the economy and industries of the future. The EFL and its fellows like Maggie have recently outlined a vision for Alberta's energy system, which you can check out at energyfutureslab.com, a link for which can be found in the chat. Hi, Maggie.
Well, hello, Steve. Great to be here.
Take it away.
Sure. Oh, I got a flashing light here. I'll have to turn that off again. So awesome stuff. You know, you've done this great job of you know, addressing the complexity and the interrelatedness of all things, and that's the kind of systems thinking that we need to be doing. And having said that, you're also a building designer. And so when we address complexity, oftentimes we find a thread where we fit and where we can pull on some of the strings on that. Mm-hmm. And so my question is, if you were queen of the world, which, you know, undoubtedly we all are, but if you were queen of the world, then, you know, what are the qualities that you would want to build into your next building project? To address a lot of these things? I'm just really curious.
Well, I would start out by making sure that whatever we build is for everyone. And one of the challenges right now, as we sort of look at, let's say, we're seeing sort of a lot of negative media around like people gathering in green spaces and getting too close together in the context of COVID, but it's actually a really good indication that we actually just don't have enough green space for the density that we support. And that has always been sort of the thing within sustainability, is densification has always been the sort of guiding light, guiding principle. Mm-hmm. And as somebody who is sort of a hill to die on urbanist, I can tell you that living in a 600 square foot apartment in downtown Toronto under lockdown really changes the way you think about the space in which you interact, not only around like actual design pieces, but around your own air quality. It's something that I've always thought about in an office space, but within a residential context. And so if I was queen of the world, I would make sure that every building made you thrive. And whatever that meant for different people, that you could find yourself in those buildings. So whether that means you're physically comfortable all the time, whether that means you actually feel healthy after working in your office all day, if you feel energized at the end of the day instead of exhausted when you get home. Because one of the things we don't think about is these transitional spaces in our lives actually impact other aspects. So if you have an office that doesn't keep you healthy, when you get home, your quality of life with your family is actually lower. Mm-hmm. And so if we can create every single space to not just be beautifully designed, but also, I I'm sorry for all the architects on the phone, but most architects are very good at making buildings painfully uncomfortable. We've essentially democratized discomfort in the interest of getting lots of daylight, which is one of the challenges, right? Is we thought that like all of these different principles. And so now we have really, really good roadmaps and tools around zero carbon and LEED certification, passive house and BOMA best and all these different sort of guidelines. We still have people build conventional buildings. And so if I was queen of the world, no more conventional buildings. All of them should excite us, they should be full of art, and they should make us thrive.
Great answer, thank you.
Do you have a follow-up, Maggie, or did that take care of it for you?
Well, I was actually, yeah, that took care of it for me, but I also have a follow-up.
Go for it.
Which is, so to make a healthy environment that isn't just beautiful, tangibly, what are some of the things that go into that besides, you know, clean air, which you've mentioned?
Mm-hmm. So it's a big question. Yes. And it really depends on what you value. So in different parts across Canada, energy efficiency and carbon emissions are really important for teams. In some places, water efficiency is. In some places, local products and materials and supporting local economies, having community benefit networks where you actually are employing people in the neighborhoods that you're building in. Mm-hmm. All of these pieces sort of add to the ability to build healthy places for healthy people. But it also makes sure that we have a healthy economy. I think one of the things that we've seen in this pandemic is just how fragile our supply chains are and how fragile our relationships are and how fragile our economy is. And I think it's really important for us to look at how buildings can support all three of those aspects going forward. There was a trend sort of around leadership that I've seen recently where legacy has sort of come into play in a way that I have never seen really before. And so it's great to see people sort of, everyone from like the top CEOs of some large companies here in Canada, all the way to like elementary school teachers, sort of deploying the same language around like health is really important. Let's take this seriously, which we've never really seen before. And so if we all think about what our legacy is going to be, if we can make these sort of slight changes in all the things that we do, whether it's me in the building industry or anybody else that might be watching today around what they do every day, there might be just little things that you can change that allow for the building that you interact with or live in to be a little bit more sustainable and help you thrive.
Thank you very much. Awesome, Brandy, thanks.
Thanks for coming on, Maggie, and thanks for the great work you do.
Thanks, Maggie.
You're welcome. Yay, hydrogen.
And so our next panelist, you'd be familiar with, Brandy. It's our Calgary Climate Hub co-chair, Matt Grace. Also no slouch when it comes to green buildings himself. Looks like he's coming online here right now. There he is.
Hey, Matt.
Hey, Brandy, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. Filled me with joy. So my day job, as you mentioned, another firm in Edmonton is I'm the principal of the Integral Group here in Calgary. Now, my question is really about hope and coping on a personal level. Some days when you're touching climate change and mitigation every day, it feels like, how do you start cleaning up after the party of all parties? You walk into the kitchen, I'll start clearing up those glasses. Oh crap, I'd better do the pizza boxes. And I heard a beautiful analogy in a meditation thing I did the other day about there being a child on a beach full of stranded starfish and just picking up a few handfuls and someone saying, what's the point? It's not going to make any difference for all these thousands of starfish, and saying, well, it made a difference to that one. So what can you share with us from your wealth of positivity amongst everything you've been through? And how do you say, you know, like you gave the beautiful example of, should I fly? If you miss your family, how do you on a very personal level justify your day-to-day actions, and how do you decide what to do and what not to do? If you miss your family, can you justify that contribution to climate change by driving 35 hours? or flying across the country. What tips can you share with us for coping with the day-to-day existence and the fact that our very being is contributing to the climate change?
I think step number one is just being honest that none of us have this figured out. And that all of us have real ups and downs. And that especially within the context that we are globally right now, it's okay for you to just take time and be still and spend time with your family. I'm gonna get emotional. Matt, you. But it's also like I've spent a lot of time on the activist stage before coming into my own on the green building side. And I watched too many people come in and out of activism because they would have a big win and then they would have 10 steps back. And it's really hard, not only to feel that yourself, but also to watch brilliant people just choose not to participate anymore. And so, there's the things that everybody tells you to do, like get lots of sleep and eat vegetables and work out and do all the things. I'm trying to get more comfortable with crying, which is like weird for me. But there's also just like a real need for all of us to be okay with telling the people in our lives that like we're not having a good day. And today I can't take feedback. Which is a funny thing in this industry, is that we're all sort of like positioned to be these sort of social justice warriors or whatever you want to call it. And I know that right now there's a lot of young people that are like really passionate about social justice and climate and gender, and like there's so many conversations happening right now. There's real fatigue around people just not being able to find common ground. And I think climate is one of those things that is quickly divisive. And so not only do you have to be a resilient human, you also have to be willing to concede sometimes just to understand where people are coming from instead of being ready to fight. And I don't mean concede in the sense of like, if you have a denier in front of you, those people can go fill their boots. I don't give them my time. I'd rather spend time with people that are doing really, really passionate work. I spent a long time trying to fight with people. It's not worth it. I'd rather give my energy to people that are doing really, really important work. But it's that resilience piece is something that's relatively new to me. I didn't take my health seriously for a very long time. And I do now. And I can tell you, it's very helpful in the sense of like, I used to use my body as a way to get my brain around. Let's say it that way. And now I am far more clear and far more able to deal with the stress and pressure of dealing with climate change and all the complexity that comes with it, because I'm actually physically healthy. And so if anybody's sort of sitting on this conversation today going, maybe I like can make a couple things, just get some sleep. It's funny, we are like, our son or daughter is misbehaving because they didn't get a lot of sleep last night, or they're just hungry, or maybe they need some water. But we don't do the same thing with ourselves. And so sometimes it is that simple. Like when you're having a hard day, just take a moment. I love watching the news. And that's actually been the hardest thing for me not to do in this little bit, because there are brilliant people that will figure out this pandemic. I can only speculate. I'm not an expert in it. What I'm an expert in is what I have some control over. And so also just sort of being really picky about where your focus is the best strategy I have. And garden, like go outside.
So what you're actually saying is my mother was right all these years.
Our moms are always right. As much as I'd like to like deny that that's the case, my mom's awesome. But like, yeah, our moms are all right.
My quick follow-up question is that I think we should argue with the deniers, because I actually would counter that with everybody's got some element of climate change that resonates with them. And if even the guy or the girl, I read a new thing called cold rolling, where someone in a big pickup truck blasts smoky fumes on a Tesla driver. That person probably takes their sleds and drives in the snow.
Mm-hmm.
So that might be the connection. Yeah. So my follow-up point is I would counter that, and I would say the onus is on us to find that connection. You know, do you
Actually,
enjoy
Matt, I
taking
completely
your
agree
toys
with you.
into the
Yeah.
backcountry? Wouldn't it be nice to protect that?
Yeah, so absolutely. If I can share just briefly, so I come from the ski industry. And one of the things that motivated me around climate change was I really want to make sure we still have snow at Christmas. I'm not a religious person, but I sure like to go to the mountains at Christmas. And I can tell you it's like the hardest part about being here because what they call snow here is not snow. But it is one of those, like, the ability to find common ground in any of the discussions that are happening right now is what's lost. And I was actually telling Steve this when we were prepping for this, is the power of conversation and finding common ground. I have a huge family. We don't all agree about stuff, but we have really lively discussions and we love each other at the end of the day. Nobody's flipping tables and storming off. Well, every once in a while, but we come back and we still like each other. And that common ground piece, I think, is what is a little bit lost. And part of it definitely has to do with the fact that we're all on devices. And when we say stuff, we don't have a face and we don't see the reaction of the person that we're talking to. But there's also something to be said about, like, all of my family from Newfoundland. They care about the environment. They're like really awesome hunters and they sled and they do all sorts of outdoor stuff. They just happen to be employed in oil and gas because that's where the jobs are or were. But there is something to be said about finding common ground for us to do it and have fun. Okay, so Matt, I'm going to challenge you, and maybe I'll make one of these for your son. But I'm really terrible at remembering people's names. So years ago, I made a guess who of like eco leaders to play, and like literally made like cards of like Ralph Nader and like Majora Carter and like Rachel Carson. So that, and they have like little descriptions of the work that they did, and like Shiva, like it's really important to like learn through play as well, so that it's not just like this overwhelming dump of information all the time, but it's also like kind and playful and makes you want to do it, right? Like, again, I don't want to save the world to sit in the dark by myself. There's net zero breweries now. Like, we can do this.
That was amazing. Thank you very much.
You brought props, Brandy. You brought props.
You filled my heart with joy. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for the work you do for the Hub as well. So I've got a question from Facebook Live. Stephen Harding, he's a great volunteer for us. He's done a lot of work helping me with my our community climate conversation initiative. He's asking about nuclear power. So we hear from some that to make clean energy work, we'll need to incorporate nuclear. And he's asking you for perspective on this. And I would just add to that I find when I'm talking to oil and gas people, if they're going to talk about any other type of energy, it seems like nuclear is the one that they bring up. They're more likely to bring that up than any of them, is what I find. What's your thoughts on nukes or nukes?
Yeah, well, nothing like ending the discussion on something wildly polarizing. So I'm going to state my bias.
Yeah.
I'm going to tap back into legacy. I get why nuclear power has a place in some places. And I also know that BC, Quebec, and Ontario have a great geographic advantage to have hydro. That's really, like, it's a geographic accident that they have such great hydropower. One of the challenges with hydro is with less and less snowpack every year, we're going to see desertification that really impacts the ability to generate power off hydro. And so I would like to say that we will never need nuclear again, but I don't know if that's the case. And so I think that there's a place for it in some places, in some markets, but I think we have a lot more options. So as somebody that's a design professional, I see the ability to produce electricity as a design challenge. I don't see it as where does it come from? Like, most people don't know when they turn on their lights where that electricity is coming from.
And they don't care.
So, or care. They
Yeah.
just want to make sure that, like, their kids are warm when they go to bed and that the lights turn on in the morning.
Right.
And so the ability for us to sort of depolarize our selections of where the electricity mix comes from is important. And so I'm really excited to see the fact that renewable energy is, and this is not because Skyfire is telling me to like do this, but I remember when Gordon Howell put those first few solar panels, PV modules, sorry everyone, but solar panels up on his rooftop. And I remember how disruptive that was at the time, even from like a metering perspective, how far we've come. Like, how exciting is it to see how much deployment of renewable energy, both wind and solar and micro turbine, all sorts of stuff that's happening. And what a great opportunity for like engineer students at the University of Alberta and the University of Calgary and SAIT and NAIT to be learning about all this right now. Because a lot of us have been told that oil and gas is like a primary industry till the end of time in Alberta, but a lot of people think that oil and gas is how we get our electricity, and it's not. Like, most of it's still coal, and we're transitioning to natural gas, and we're betting on the math to be right that natural gas is lower emission than coal. But within this conversation of nuclear or not nuclear, it's kind of like arguing about whose church is right. Like, you don't really win at the end because it's such a large conversation, and the deployment of capital to build new nuclear is a challenge for me to justify. Like, that type of investment can get you a whole lot of renewable. Yeah. I'm sorry if that's not the answer that anybody wanted, but
no, we wanted whatever answer you had there. I've got my own opinions on all of that stuff as well. But the final question that I have for you tonight is just, what do you think? For myself as a climate advocate, for the Calgary Climate Hub as a climate organization that works hard at moving the ball, what's your advice to us on how we can push things like a just recovery and how we can keep getting victories in this time?
Well, to build off of what Matt was talking about, find common ground. Find things that are visual and tangible that you can share with people. Like, the work that My Heat is doing is impressive. If there's people that have never heard of My Heat, do some like Googling, but there's some really impressive imaging that's possible to actually take these like odd things that are really just physics exercises sometimes. Like, sometimes you're like bogged down in the math and spreadsheets of it all, but it gives you a visual. And that's the thing with this. I think if like GHG emissions and carbon was like an odorful purple gas in our life, people would take action faster, or dare I say, a virus. But it's the fact that it's not tangible. And so I would like to invite everybody to get out of your technical language when you're talking to people and find these tangible storytelling moments where you can actually find common ground and get people to actually care. Because it's hard to care about math. I get it. As somebody who like loves math, I just happen to be a weirdo in most dinner parties. But like, to get people excited about like a chart or a graph, not something I want to commit my life to. But around like how exciting it is, I feel like I get to go to work. I get to participate. Like, Matt is fantastic. And the fact that he and I get to work on stuff together is such a luxury. And I think that that's the way I want to spend the rest of my life, is like doing good work with great people, and just also being able to like feed myself and house myself. Like, what better career could I possibly have? And so if there's folks that are on this webinar today that are like in school or thinking about school, we need more people in the building industry. We need more people in the trades that care about high performance buildings, because we can care about the environment all we want, but we don't have enough skilled people to build these buildings. And so like, that's going to be that interesting part as we go forward around climate change, is like, what are the jobs that we actually need to train people for to hit these priorities?
Fair enough. It makes sense to me. Brandy, thanks so much for coming on tonight.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate the chat.
Okay, so, well, that's just about it for this week's A Climate of Change. If you like this Thursday night broadcast, we want you to know that it wouldn't be possible without our excellent sponsor, Skyfire Energy. They've paved the way for solar in Western Canada and will certainly be a big part of our future. I'll just do a quick plug for the Calgary Climate Hub. One of the things that I try to make sure I mention each week is if climate anxiety or you know, all of the frustrations you feel on climate gets you down, you're not alone. A lot of us in climate feel that way, and the only solution that I've found whatsoever is to join an organization that is legitimately moving the ball and to sit around the table with smart people and work on making bona fide change. So find yourself a group like that. I'm going to heartily recommend the Calgary Climate Hub as one of those groups. There are climate hubs across the country under the auspices of Climate Reality Canada. So if there isn't a climate hub in your city, start one. Get one going. And you can become a member if you've got some time and you want to get your hands dirty. You can also make donations because it's not an easy dollar, especially in this city, and we'll take whatever you've got for us. Beyond that, I want to thank my volunteers, my producer Shay, Joan, who does a lot of work on the back end of these things, and my sound assistant Paul. And finally, I'd just like to thank our viewers for tuning in and caring about the right things. Good night for now, and let's get to work. Thanks again, Brandy. We'll see you. We'll talk to you soon.